will deliver a keynote speech. Plus, it's an honor to have you joining us today. On November 8, 2016, California State Assemblyman Kevin Kiley was elected to represent the 6th Assembly District, which includes Placer, Sacramento, and El Dorado counties. Before being elected to the State Assembly, Kevin represented the people of California as a Deputy Attorney General in cases involving convicted felons. He has taken this commitment to the safety of Californians to the legislature, where he has authored legislation to protect victims and support law enforcement. Earlier in his career, Kevin taught 10th grade English at an inner-city public high school, where he chaired the English department and led his students to significant academic gains. The son of a special education teacher, Kevin is working to advance educational opportunity for all Californians with measures to expand parental choice and access to career education. Kevin was born and raised in the communities of the 6th Assembly District and graduated as a member of Granite Bay High School's 5th graduating class. He earned a bachelor's degree from Harvard, a law degree from Yale, and a master's in secondary education from Loyola Marymount. Without further delays, let's welcome Kevin.
Thank you very much. Great to be here, and what an amazing group. Like, some of my favorite people in the world, and particularly in education, are here. I'm really bummed I missed the Lance Izumi, Mary Barkey panel earlier. That must have been fantastic. Two of my very good friends and truly two of the great education leaders in California. I was actually over speaking to a group called East County Mamas and Papas for Freedom. Yeah, awesome. Tons of extremely engaged parents, and there were at least a handful of people who are running for school board who are there as well. So it's pretty exciting because I see this all across California right now. Is you have a level of engagement and involvement and people stepping up like we have never seen before. And regardless of what happens across the country when it comes to Congress or legislatures or anything else, I of course have my preferences for the way things go there. I think you're going to see perhaps the most significant changes at the level of school boards. In California, you're seeing that. I just put out on my social media that I want, if you're someone who's a pro-parent, pro-student candidate running for school board, I want to endorse you, and we already have close to 200 requests from people all across the state who are running. So it's pretty exciting what's going on right now in education, but it's sort of taken everything we've endured over the last couple of years to get there. So I looked at the lineup of speakers, and I was trying to think what could I even add to this incredible lineup. So I thought I'd just spend a few minutes giving you kind of my experience as a member of the legislature inside the Capitol over the last several years, and then reserve most of the time for any questions. Does that sound okay?
Yeah, thank you.
So I should have said I'm the former vice chair of the California State Assembly Education Committee. I say former because they unceremoniously removed me from that role at the beginning of this year, deciding that it'd be better not to have me there talking about the issues that we're all talking about today. But I was there for some 5 years on the Education Committee. This is my 6th year in the legislature. It's my final year, actually. I'm running for Congress now, so I'll hopefully be serving in a different capital soon. I walked off the floor of the State Assembly for the last time at 1 a.m. This Thursday. So at the last event this morning with the East County group, when I said that, they're like, oh no, you're not going to be there. I said, well, the good news is it was also Senator Pan's last day. And the other good news, by the way, is that we've got some great people who are remaining in our caucus in the legislature, and who are really fighting in a way that I haven't seen before in my time there as well. So sort of the movement that's brewing across the state and has been building, I think has really caught on with many of our, at least Republican representatives in the legislature as well. But I came into the legislature in I guess it was December 2016. I had never run for office before. I had been a lawyer, a recovering lawyer. I had been a prosecutor. I'd also been a high school teacher. So I taught in LA, kind of by USC, if you know that neighborhood. I was there through a program called Teach for America, which I'm sure many people have heard of. Side note, our legislature in California has in recent years tried to ban Teach for America from California. Not making this up, there's actually a bill that literally said, this is a bill to ban Teach for America from California. Eventually they said, well, maybe you shouldn't name the organization. So then they just listed various characteristics that only applied to Teach for America. That bill did pass the Education Committee twice. Although it's never made it past the full Senate. But TFA is an organization that has been around since the early 90s. The idea was to recruit recent college graduates and place them in underserved communities. So that's what I did. The reason that the legislature wants to abolish them is the teachers' unions have never liked them for various reasons, one of which is that a lot of the students are placed at charters, but there are other reasons as well. So I had that experience. I taught 10th grade English, and I was very committed to the ideal of educational equity in a real meaning of the word, in the sense that every person has an equal opportunity, that every child has the right to the opportunity to an excellent education. Equity in a way that actually means something. Whereas our legislature and governor and many of the large school districts in this state have adopted a much different meaning of that word and have used it to hammer in policies that have quite the opposite impact in terms of the opportunities that are available for kids. So before all the COVID insanity happened, California education was already in a not great place, right? In fact, if you look at just the various test scores for the National Assessment of Educational Progress, you just pick 4th grade reading, 8th grade math, it's all like we're 47th in the country, we're 48th in the country, we're 46th in the country. Overall, in 2019, when it came to learning outcomes for students who are eligible for free or reduced lunch, and you compare that to how similarly situated students do in other states, so this is an apples-to-apples comparison as to how states are serving kids who are living in poverty, California ranked 49th out of the 50 states, ahead of only Alaska. This is all pre-COVID. So I came into the legislature and I tried to advance legislation that would chart a different course, that would support school choice, that would support accountability in our public school system, that would bring the idea of merit into the way we think about education, which is largely absent in the way schools are run in California. So one of my first bills in the legislature was actually a school choice bill. Now, it wasn't a bill to create education savings accounts or to let funding follow the child or anything that ambitious. It wasn't even a bill about charters. It was a bill about allowing a greater degree of choice within the traditional public education system. It's a very modest proposal. What I wanted to do was make it so those students who are most in need have a greater degree of choice as far as the district they go to. And so it said that if you were one of the unduplicated pupils, if you were eligible for free or reduced lunch, if you were an English language learner, if you were a foster youth, then you would have a right to transfer school districts, as long as the receiving district had space and would allow you in. Because what happens is massive districts like LAUSD, when students want to transfer out, the district can veto it. And so the family wants to send their kid to a better district that does a better job, that has better options, that's a better fit for their child. And say, no, you're not going anywhere. We're going to keep you the money that goes with your child, and we'll keep you at the failing school that's not doing you any good. So this was the point of this bill. I was one of 7 members on the Education Committee. It was a 5-2 split, Democrats, Republicans. The bill failed on a 4-3 vote. One of the Democrats supported it, the others opposed it. So that was my first attempt. So we brought it back the next year, and we made it even less ambitious. We said, we just created sort of the most almost sympathetic categories. So kids who had experienced homelessness, we said, or those who had suffered from bullying, and a couple other categories, and said that you have this right to be able to transfer school districts. Now, this one actually did pass the the Education Committee, and made it through the Assembly, and made it through the Senate, and Jerry Brown vetoed it. So that was the last time I have ever seen any bill that advances any form of school choice, or really what would be considered good education reform principles that have worked in other states, make it through California. Oh, actually I take that back. They do let me sponsor school choice every year, right, Lance?
Yeah, they do.
Lance is involved in this. We have a photo of him. It's the yellow stars, right? Is the deal. So they do at least vote for my school choice month bill, which is celebrating school choice, something that is completely rejected time and time again in the legislature. Now, Jerry Brown vetoed that bill, which was very disappointing, but at least he sort of was better than the current governor, and put something on a break on the most menacing ideas of the CPA and their legislators, the ones they control, which is most of them, in the California legislature. So the war on charters was already well underway by that point, but it was being conducted in a somewhat more under-the-radar way. Brown did sign some anti-charter bills, but it wasn't nearly as bad as what came later. What they were pursuing was sort of a death by 1,000 cut strategy. So every time a bill was proposed creating some new mandate for the public school system, whenever it came to the Education Committee, the committee would insist on an amendment that applied to charters as well, which of course undermines the entire idea of a charter school, which is that in return for the accountability that doesn't exist in the traditional public education system, you are liberated largely from the constraints of the massive education code and free to run your school as you see fit. So they were trying to, by a million cuts, sort of re-regulate the charter sector of our public education system. So that's how things were sort of moving along in the legislature, 2017, 2018. There were also some other things happening when it comes to curriculum. So we had what was even the initial legislation called? The Healthy Families Act or something along those lines, that provided the framework for what the Board of Education would later use to implement these totally radical sex ed curricula being foisted upon districts and classrooms across the state. And there was a lot of parent activity that was generated in response to this when they're like looking at what their kids are being shown in school. Wait a minute, what is going on here? So you had a lot of these concerned parents groups that were starting to spring up, and in a sense, it was a precursor almost to some of what we've seen over the last couple of years. You also had the first attempt in 2019 at adopting CRT in California schools. So it was in 2019, actually it was before that, they passed a bill to create a model curriculum. They called it ethnic studies, but everyone knew what it was. And so they convened this group of various radical university professors, right, in ethnic studies departments, all of these departments in the social studies, where, by the way, surveys show there are more self-identified Marxists than self-identified conservatives. And so they went about their work, and they released their model curriculum in 2019. And the response to it was very interesting. Does anyone remember this? So nowadays, if you oppose CRT, it's like you're, fill in the blank, right? Whatever epithet they want to throw in. In 2019, everyone was opposed to it when this model curriculum came out. It was universally condemned. State Superintendent of Instruction, Tony Thurmond, came out and said he didn't like it. Is Lance here, by the way? I've seen some of his buttons. We need to get Lance elected State Superintendent. Am I allowed to say that? Is this some sort of... good. Violating some... threatening your tax status. Don't want that to happen. Good. Elect Lance. Yeah. Gavin Newsom came out and said, this is a quote, "It is offensive in so many ways, and it will never see the light of day." That's what Newsom said. The California Legislative Jewish Caucus, which happened to be at the time 12 Democrat legislators, they put out one of the most scathing letters I've ever seen. They said that this model CRT curriculum, or ethnic studies curriculum, echoed the propaganda of the Nazi regime. That's an exact quote from their letter. These Democrats. So then what happened? You know, you'd think that that would be the end of it, right? We'd scrape the whole thing. We hold these people who came up with this accountable. I mean, people have lost their jobs, lost their careers for things far less egregious than trying to foist Nazi propaganda upon high school students, right? But no, that's not what happened. Despite Gavin Newsom saying it would never see the light of day, they said, all right, we'll make a few tweaks, we'll make a few edits, we'll tone down the Nazi propaganda a little bit, and then we'll impose it on every high school student in California. And so in 2001, this bill passed the legislature. I spoke against it on the assembly floor. And one of the points that I made in this speech was about the issue of equity. That using things like CRT or like Prop 16 to try to pretend to a standard of equity when in fact the corrupt education policies in our state have produced the most inequitable outcomes of any state in the country, the largest achievement gaps, it's just a total farce. And so that was sort of the prelude to the earthquake that has begun over the last couple of years. So California had the widest achievement gaps, as I said, 49th out of 50 in educating poor kids, even prior to COVID. And the COVID shutdowns, predictably, I mean, there was just no doubt about this in advance, just absolutely widened and exploded those gaps. And this is all being borne out by the evidence. And so, you know, by July of 2020, this was when the debate was going on, what's going to happen with schools for the new year. And, you know, the legislature had kind of largely said, oh, COVID's going on, I guess we could take the year off. It wasn't really meeting. Not much was being done. Newsom was ruling the state by decree. The evidence was so clear at that time already. And so I strongly encouraged Gavin Newsom to have schools be open, or at the very least don't make them close. To his credit, I mean, to the extent that this is really credit-worthy, his education advisor did at least have a conversation with me where I conveyed these points. And many, many people were saying the same thing. The American Academy of Pediatrics had come out in favor of school reopening. Even the New York Times had done an editorial saying we need to open schools. The evidence is abundantly clear on this point as to, number one, the limited impact of COVID on kids. Number two, the lack of any clear connection between the operation of schools and community transition rates. And number three, the searing, incalculable harm done to kids by closing schools. Yet, in spite of all of this, Newsom did a statewide school closure order, closed over 95% of the state's schools. You know, it was one of only 5 or 6 statewide school closure orders in the entire country. And after that, that was the big win for the teachers' unions, right? And you know, it was interesting because it took them a little while almost to realize the opportunity they had. You know, but within a matter of weeks, they understood that this was their Super Bowl, right? If you can get schools closed, then you can extract anything you want, anything you've ever wanted, in order to get them back open. And so once Newsom did that and shut down the entire state, that was it. They had what they wanted. They had shifted the default from open to closed. And then, you know, when it came time to even let districts reopen, they could get whatever they wanted at the district level, but it took a long time before that was even allowed. And so, I mean, and it was crazy. I remember in the fall of that year, you had, you know, there's a handful of places where you could open based on whatever the heck the system was at that point, the colors or the tiers or whatever the standard was, right? But even the tiny districts that wanted to open, they'd send in top-level CTA negotiators to tell them, no, you have to stay closed. we don't want to set any sort of precedent here that could, lead other schools to open. I will say on a side note, Placer County, where I live and represent, was the first county in the entire state to open its schools. And El Dorado County wasn't that far behind. And Mary Barkey in Orange County fought as hard as anyone to get schools open as well. But you have districts like LAUSD and San Francisco Unified that just refused to open even when they were allowed to. SF Unified, by the way, they might be the worst of the worst. They're going around with their school renaming commission during all of this. The schools aren't running, but they're saying, Abraham Lincoln isn't woke enough to have a school named after him. Even Dianne Feinstein, which why did she have a school named after her in the first place? But they said she was insufficiently woke to have her name on a school. So they're doing all of this. They even scammed the state for millions of dollars. Because in March of 2021, at this point, the big districts were still closed. Across the entire country, schools are pretty much open. Even in other blue states, they're open. California was last in the entire country by a wide margin in getting kids back to school. And it wasn't even close. But nevertheless, LAUSD, San Francisco Unified, they refused to do it. Lots of other districts across the state. So on this particular day, there was the school reopening bill that passed the legislature. This is in March of 2021. I proposed an amendment that would actually open schools. That was shot down. Instead, they passed a bill and said, we'll just give you more money. That's what it was. Which, of course, is what was the goal all along. And so they said, if you open schools, this is what the bill said, we're going to give you money. And so the fine people in San Francisco Unified, they look at this and they say, okay, we'll open schools. All right. So they opened for the last 2 weeks of the school year. They picked 2 of their 14 high schools. They say you're going to have in-person supervision, not instruction, supervision 1 day a week for the last 2 weeks of the school year. So then we can claim that we're open and we can get the millions of dollars. That's exactly what they did. There's total grifters over at San Francisco Unified. So this is and then, we don't need to walk through step by step everything that's happened since then. But once schools were allowed to open, we've had the most draconian mandates of any state in the entire country. And each and every step of the way, from the mask mandates to the vaccine mandates to everything else. It's just sort of fueled the anger and the frustration of parents across the state, or perhaps even more importantly, it's given a lot of people a window into what's been going on for a long time. And so people are seeing what's going on with CRT, with the sex ed curriculum. They're seeing what's going on in the other classes. They're seeing that their kids are not really learning the way that they should. I mean, you talk about all these statistics I mentioned before. There was a lawsuit, it must have been in, 2014 or so, where students sued the state for not giving them access to a quality education, which is a constitutional right in California. There was a big victory in the trial court, although it was tossed out on appeal. It tends to be a problem in California. As some might know, I sued Gavin Newsom myself, along with James Gallagher, and won a trial, and then the appellate court came in. There was also a lawsuit where students sued the state because they weren't being taught to read. Literacy in California is just about the worst in the country. And the state actually settled that lawsuit for $50 million. So we're seeing, a lot of parents have had their eyes open to the fact that to how our schools are being misrun and why it is we've been failing for so long. And so I think that right now presents a unique opportunity to really bring about substantial change across the state. And so that gets us back to what's going on with the school boards. And I think that, what's most important about what we're seeing, and by the way, I mentioned that our school boards, our schools in Placer County opened earlier than anywhere else. Well, a big part of that is that we had a slate of candidates that won and threw out longtime incumbents in the 2020 election. And so we had good people on those boards who viewed their role not as one of compliance. Too many school boards that just think, well, the state is calling the shots, and then our job as a board is just to fulfill the mandates, follow whatever instructions that we get. That's kind of the mentality of district offices, which is not, there's a lot of great people working at district offices, but they tend to have a compliance mentality, and so no matter how bad what the state is doing is, it's like, all right, we just need to dot the I's and cross the T's, and we'll teach the radical sex ed stuff, or we'll make your 5-year-old wear a mask, or we'll, we'll teach literacy away that's been shown not to work, and that other states aren't doing anymore. We'll do all of that because the state says so. So the folks that we elected in Placer and El Dorado, and that we're now seeing hundreds of other candidates like this step up across the state, they have a very different vision for what the role of school board member is. Sharon is here with Let Them Breathe, who's running for school board in Yes, and sorry, you're running as well, right?
Yes, and our school, Lamar Union Elementary School District, opened November 1st of 2020. So there were schools in California that were open.
There you go. Absolutely.
We were a small district that we did everything good for kids.
That's awesome. Are you on the board? So you're on the board then?
I'm running because
You're running.
someone asked me to.
All right. Beautiful. That's what it takes, right?
Yes.
But, folks like you, like Sharon, see the role of a school board member as to respond to the community and the values, and as stewards of, of the public interest, and as, folks that are there to serve parents and kids and to help them work. And so, in our county, in the Roseville Joint Union School District, they were the first to say we're not doing masks anymore. And then, you'd heard all this, these stories of what's going to happen to you. Oh, you're going to lose your funding. You're going to lose your insurance. The schools are going to be shut down. And so we had one district that said, well, okay, we're just going to do it. We're tired of seeing kids suffer. We're tired of doing things that make no sense and harm kids for no good reason. We're just going to do it. They passed a resolution that said we're not going to do the mask anymore. Dozens of other districts then followed. And that's what forced Gavin Newsom's hand. No one was, fault. It was embarrassing. No one was listening to what he said. And that's when he ended up reversing the statewide mask mandate. So having this sort of different vision for the role of the school board is so important, because it really is a powerful counterweight to whatever nonsense we get out of Sacramento, whether it comes from the legislature, the governor, the state board of education. And ultimately, what I want to see, and there's a lot of debates within the community of those who favor reform as to the best way to get to a better education system in this state. Is it to try to expand charters? Is it to have education savings accounts? Is it other forms of choice? But fundamentally, this idea of merit that I know this conference and this organization is largely oriented around is a really important one, which is to say, right now the paradigm is that the state regulates the inputs, right? It says, here's what you need to do. It's very prescriptive as to how a school exactly needs to run. We're going to tell people in the district hundreds of miles from here to a T the way they need to run their school. But then it doesn't care about the outcomes. Whether the kids learn or not, that's beside the point. Schools can fail kids year after year after year. The same teacher can fail kids year after year after year. And there's no consequence. Oh, I need to, as a side note on that one. So teacher tenure reform has been a big topic in the Capitol. California has basically the shortest tenure requirements, or the least tenure requirements of any state in the country. It's 2 years, and then you're basically unfireable, really regardless of what you do in most circumstances. Even if you do something truly egregious, districts are hesitant to pursue any sort of action, because then that swallows up hundreds of thousands of dollars in litigation, which the unions will, in fact, definitely make you go through. So in California, it's 2 years, or it's really like a year and a half, because the administration, kind of needs to make the call at that point. The perverse consequence of this, well, there's a lot of perverse consequences, but what it ultimately leads to is they sort of tend to err on the side of caution. And so a lot of promising young teachers are let go at that point, while they still have probationary status, because it's sort of like, if they're not, then you have them forever. So there was a bill, Democrat-sponsored bill, my first year in the legislature, that would have changed that pretty modestly. It would have made it 3 years, and then an option to extend it to 5 in those sort of borderline cases where someone might need more professional development or that sort of thing. Miraculously, this passed the Education Committee. This is my first year. It was one of the only times in recent memory that good reform-oriented legislation got out of the Education Committee. There were, as I mentioned before, 5 Democrats, 2 Republicans, so 2 of the Democrats voted yes. One of whom, actually both of whom, were Assembly members for this county. Shirley Weber, who's now our Secretary of State, and Todd Moria. Now you're mayor. Well, are we in the city of now? We are. Okay. Apologies for my failing geography. So Todd was new to the legislature like me at that time, so I kind of got to know him. And he does the right thing on this bill. He votes for it. What do you think happened to him after that? He was out, ousted from the Education Committee. And he learned his lesson and never, to my knowledge, crossed the union again. And that's just the way they do things at the Capitol. But in any case, I've given a little more extended of a overview than I was intending. But I will say this, that I could not be more excited about what this year holds in terms of the potential to bring major, meaningful change in California and across the country when it comes to education. And I want to thank all of you for the very important role you're playing in making that happen. Happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, two things. Number one, I've been tracking and following. Oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Two things. Number one, I've been tracking and following all the work that you've done over the last several years. You've been pushing a boulder uphill, and I just want to say thank you for being the voice of the second question I have is, with all of the funds, all the federal funds that came as a result of COVID, as a result of some of the smoke and mirrors you described, is the state still sitting on a lot of money that they could allocate towards education?
Well, sure. I mean, the state supposedly has a $100 billion surplus. Which, by the way, Newsom will say is a sign of good governance. We're doing such a good job. We got a $100 billion surplus. It's like, well, didn't we have like a $60 billion deficit 2 years ago? Is that good governance when you yo-yo like that? And so, yeah, of course, you can put more money towards education. But is that going to help? No, I don't think so. We've increased education funding so much in California. Ever since LCFF went into effect, which I think held some promise initially, but really hasn't led to anything, any meaningful change, and is largely, I think, has some very perverse consequences, actually. Education, I don't even know what the current number is. I think it's gone up like $60 billion or something over the last 8 or 9 years. It's gone, and that's every year. And we're spending that much more every year. It's gone up an extraordinary amount. There's been no meaningful evidence to show that this has improved student learning outcomes. There are a lot of states across the country that get far better outcomes with a lot less money. Yeah. One of the perversities of LCFF, by the way, is that it is funding districts at the district level as opposed to schools. So LAUSD is just a behemoth. I think it's something like 4 times larger than the next largest district in California. So all this money just gets, thrown to Votery, which is what we call the district office there. Who knows where it goes, right? It certainly doesn't reach kids. And if you really want to drill down into the incentives this puts in place, what it actually leads to, if you want to talk about equity, is it actually leads to vastly inequitable funding within a school district. And here's why. Because one of the ironclad rules of teachers' unions is seniority preference. So, you get paid more, and you get your choice of school as you get more seniority. And that's also the reason we have what's called LIFO, last in, first out. Whenever layoffs have to happen, it's the young teachers who get thrown out, no matter how good they are, no matter what outcomes they have, no matter how much their students like them, doesn't matter. They're out. One consequence of this seniority preference system is, generally speaking, the more tenured teachers want to go to sort of the better off schools in more affluent areas. And of course, they command a higher salary. And so what that means is that within a given district, the sort of wealthier schools actually get funded to a lot more than the less wealthy schools do, even though the entire point of LCFF was to do precisely the opposite. And so, you could go through a million examples like this of how they've just, designed the system to produce these sort of outcomes. Okay, yes, sir.
When I was going to California schools in the 1950s, they were by far the best in the nation.
Right.
What happened?
Well, have you ever heard Pete Wilson speak? Our Republican governor from the 90s. He makes that exact point, and he says that what happened was, 3 letters, CTA. Teachers unions became the most powerful special interest in the state by a mile. No one's even close. No one's even close. Some of the other massive union conglomerates are also, the main other players. But the teachers union is far and away above them because they have a very, very convenient business model, which is that every single teacher gets conscripted into their ranks, and they get a cut of every paycheck. And so that has led them to spend, the last time I saw this measured, they spent more on politics than the next largest union it was like twice as much, something like that. Now some of us hoped that the Janus decision would start to change this. This was the decision that gave you essentially a right to opt out of having any portion of the paycheck go towards the union. And while there are great groups like California Policy Center that are helping teachers to do precisely that, it hasn't produced the sort of massive impact we hoped just yet, largely because as soon as Janus came down, the legislature went to work immediately, hand in glove with the union, to make it very, very difficult to opt out. They give you a very narrow time frame. They make the default that you're in. You have to actively say that you're out, and so forth. Yes, your fault?
Yeah. You say that it's the teachers' union, but you would think the teachers would want what's best for the kids. So there's no breakdown between the teachers and the union leaders, or where is that?
Well, no, that's exactly right. I think that the vast majority of teachers want what's best for kids. There's definitely some bad ones. There was one teacher in a district right by me that recently was caught trying to recruit students into Antifa, by the way, and he admitted that his goal was to turn them into revolutionaries. He got a golden parachute, 3 years pay severance.
Wow.
Pretty good, right? But I do think that the vast majority of teachers really want what's best for their kids, and my mom was a teacher. I had a teaching stint, so I love teachers. The unions are a totally different story. They're a political operation. They figured out how to completely control the system. And you don't really have independent unions anymore either. The CTA has just taken them over, or they're all just subsidiaries. The biggest of which is UCLA in LA, which has just become. We remember their sort of manifesto in the early stages of COVID, where they came out and said, okay, here's what we want before schools reopen. You got to get rid of Prop 13. You got to defund the police. You got to abolish charters. What else was on there? They had some crazy stuff.
Medicare for all.
Medicare for all, thank you. So this is, in my view, the biggest problem. And, of course, they've also been very savvy about the way they run their operation. They've bought off a lot of the other sort of liberal special interest groups that might object to the fact that you're making life really hard on poor kids in minority communities. But they spread their money around to make sure that everyone is on the same page. Yes, sir.
It isn't so much a question as the quality of the people who are becoming teachers now is sort of being diminished because women, who are the majority of teachers, now have access to jobs in the rest of society that pay way more. And so we're getting less qualified teachers now.
Well, I do think that teacher quality is an important issue. And it is, I think, true that the sort of training you get in order to become a teacher is not aligned with necessarily what makes an effective teacher in many cases. A lot of our schools of education are just totally, caught up in the prevailing ideology of the left, don't provide necessarily the sort of training that makes you effective. There are some good ones, but there are a lot that aren't. And then what the unions have done is they've made it so there is really one, in most cases, acceptable pathway to being a teacher, which is going through the entire credentialing process that they set forth, which is designed to kind of get you under their control. So alternative credentialing, bringing in people who are experts in their subject areas and now want to teach, they make all of that very difficult. So I think that if we explored some of those options, it'd be a good way to recruit high-powered people to teach.
Let's take one more question.
Okay, yes. Sorry, I feel like I'm ignoring people in back. I hope that I'm not missing anything.
So,
Yeah, go ahead.
so in 2016, we passed the California Healthy Youth Act,
Right.
which allowed children to change their genders and if they so requested or responded right with activist teachers that they didn't want their parents to know, then it would be kept secret, and the districts will send out a gender support plan to teachers directing them that you must now refer to this kid as this gender. Let's say it's Bobby, now it's Cindy. But when you talk to that parent's teacher, or when you talk to that student's parents, you cannot let that be known that you're calling Bobby Cindy at school. You have to pretend that Bobby's still Bobby. So it makes them keep that secret from the kids. And yet, in 2021, we passed a law in California that requires all incoming police officers to have a bachelor's degree. And in that law, they cited neuroscience that said, you know, we rely on the science that says children cannot make good decision-making or processing skills because their brains are not fully developed. So how can you have a law in 2021 that says kids cannot make good decisions, but we can still have a law from 2016 that says kids can change their gender and hide it from their parents all the way down to kindergarten? How is that possible?
Well, your question is presupposing that there's any sort of rational basis.
I need to go get one.
I don't have an answer, I'm sorry. I mean, believe me, I've been watching these things, these bills, fighting against them, but I was at the Capitol, you know, for most of this week, and this is the end of session, so we're there every day for, you know, basically the whole day up until 1 a.m. on Thursday morning. And by the way, on your point, there's this now gender-affirming care bill that just passed. Have you heard about this? Which basically lets the state of California kidnap your child if they're coming from another state. Some sort of sex change operation.
Yeah, 107.
107, that's the one. Yeah, I mean, it's like, I don't know how they even come up with stuff. But, you know, and we've had a lot of victories, by the way. I don't think that we talked about it, this, you know, I don't know, maybe it was mentioned earlier, but a lot of the very worst bills were killing legislature this year. And that's a result of people stepping up and fighting back. But yeah, it's like people ask me, how do I sort of stomach what goes on there? When we see things passing like this, it just makes no sense, do so much harm. No even debate, they don't even try to give real reasons for these things sometimes. And just the corruption, right? We're doing things just that we know are wrong for kids. How do you stomach it? And I gotta tell you, sometimes it is like just banging your head against the wall, and I walk out of there and it's like, oh my God. But being among folks like you who are so passionate and dedicated to fighting for the right things, and who care so much about assuring that kids in our state get the education they deserve, that is really re-energizing and rejuvenating for me, and it makes it well worth putting up with the nonsense I have to in Sacramento. So thank you very much.